As a 7-year-old in Japan, I had invented a game where we would count the number of girls' underwear we could see. As a 7-year-old, who does that? I grew up in Japan, Brazil, and the United States, probably the three of the most sexualized cultures on the planet. And no one really ever taught me how to utilize that very powerful, potent energy. You know, Going back to Japan, like Japan is a very has some perverted cultural elements to it. As a boy in the first grade, this fact that I had created this game where, we used to kind of try to see girls' panties was just normal, and my peers and I all played it. Looking back at it, it was just a little ridiculous. I have a memory of sitting next to this girl in art class and her just lifting her skirt up, and I'm like, nice, 34. Like, no wonder, you know, I've had some difficulties with my own sexuality. Moving to America as a kid, uh, I remember, very early on, like finding some movie I watched where a girl's naked or there was some sex scene, and going to school and just asking my my friend, and I'm like, hey, where do I see more of that? And he was just like, just Google it, and that was probably the worst thing, because that kind of led me down a rabbit hole, and before I knew it, I'm like creating MySpace like messages and comment threads of all of these like porn links that I'd found and sending it to my water polo teammates. Um, Not to mention the time, of just like downloading all this crap onto my family computer, and being caught by my parents, by my dad, like 3 or 4 times, and having these like really awkward kind of like, son, you shouldn't do this, but really not really understanding kind of like the bigger picture behind it, and why it was so damaging to me. Um, I just really like never had this a framework for my sexuality. So it was just like just this deep appetite and an internet connection, and this kind of like watching of porn really escalated over the years, and it it changed how I saw women, my how I saw them as objects of my sexual desires, and not really people. And so naturally, as relationships were built on sexual compatibility, uh, you know, and confusing that for something deeper. You know, I'm a little kind of reluctant to say this on camera, but there was a period, here in South America where I got introduced to, prostitutes. And, I'm very ashamed of kind of having entertained that, and having, dabbled in that. But the worst is just like the shame around that, of just kind of like this constant uh, urge, then the shame and the guilt, the confusion that you're never going to do it again, and then it just kind of like repeats itself some way. I even had a time, where, you know, filming myself with partners, and kind of using that to kind of do, whatever later, and just same thing, just shame, and guilt, and confusion. And I feel like, I sought therapy and multiple times in my life, but ultimately it just kind of stayed very surface level, and maybe I wasn't open enough to kind of dig deep into it, but it never really worked for me. I was just kind of in this cycle of, disgust with myself, shame, confusion, and then some time would pass, and I would just kind of like do it all over again. And I'm sure that, you know, undoubtedly I've been the cause of sexual trauma for other people, and I just need to say that out loud. Somewhere along those lines, I really tried to kind of like harness my sexual energy, and I got into semen retention, and I found that it was really good for me, and it worked, but it had kind of like the ceiling, because it was ultimately all about me, my streak, my energy, and how awesome I was, and actually how much I was getting female validation and attention because of it. And because it was so kind of like egocentric and self-centered, I felt like there was a ceiling that I hit pretty quickly with it, that I just kind of like fall, and I was doing it for the wrong reasons. I was doing it for my own kind of ego trip, and it, it just doesn't really work. And at the same time, I was kind of really starting to discover kind of my spirituality, or rediscover my spirituality, and find my faith. And I stumbled onto Chastity through this book written by a Jesuit. And he really reframed it, saying, chastity isn't the repression of sexual desire. It's really like an integration of it. It's really, understanding that we're sexual beings. That's normal, that's healthy, that's natural. But it's really an opportunity for us to use that sexual energy for growth. And I think, in the semen retention world, and Napoleon Hill, they kind of call it the transmutation of it. But I never really understood that until I kind of started practicing chastity. And I think it's really important to note that chastity isn't celibacy. It's not, I'm not vowing never to have sex again. It's really more about, instead of kind of stopping these cyclical feelings, it's like asking, hey, like, why am I feeling this? Where is this coming from? Sitting with this desire and just being like, huh, that's interesting. Like, why am I so, I'm still very sexually charged. And like, when I see a beautiful woman, I'm like, oh, my mind just it still goes there. But instead of just kind of like being like, no, 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 I can't. I'm practicing semen retention. I just kind of sit with it, and I'm just like, damn, why do I feel that way? Like, that woman is not good for me. But I'm still kind of like wanting that. But more importantly, giving me this enough space to not only start seeing the patterns for myself, but to see that woman that I had just objectified. Okay, let's look beyond just the curves and the body and whatnot, and be like, can I, like, why is she dressed that way? Who is that person underneath that all? Where does she need healing? And then kind of going into it from a place of my heart, rather than just kind of like this impulsive, just like, oh, sexual charge. And I think this is something that I've kind of had as a proof of concept, in that, I got out of a 3-year relationship not too long ago, and it was very much driven on kind of like sexual attraction for each other, and it was great. But I think there's a lot of like underlying things that we hadn't really addressed, because there wasn't this foundation that had been cultivated outside of the bedroom. And I think that's the key about chastity, is like really being able to love someone without sleeping with them. And this applies for, male female relationships, but even with my guy friends, it's like I can have chaste love for them. It's like, oh, like, well, he's probably thinking this way because of this and this and this reason, and really seeing them fully. But bringing that into kind of like the female relationships has been nothing short of amazing for me. You know, these last two women that I've talked to and kind of had, some chemistry with, it was interesting because both times I really led with chastity, and it allowed me not to immediately like put them into jumping into bed, but really a attitude of like, I want to really get to know this person. And I found that in that desire to really get to know them, I really got to know myself better, and really got to kind of understand myself, and like how I set boundaries, what am I looking for in a woman. And it's been so beautiful because both relationships have allowed me, and mind you, these aren't like real relationships. These are just kind of like acquaintances that never really like, no, they're more than acquaintances. But there was this level of like depth that we were both able to achieve really quickly, because I came in with a mindset of chastity, of really seeing them, of really trying to hear them, really understanding them. And as a result, our relationship, even though in duration and time was shorter, it was much deeper. And I could see my own patterns in real time. And, especially in this last one, like, as we're getting closer and closer, like and I even told her this, like, and she knows this, it's like my urge to run away, you know, just got really came to the surface, and we were able to kind of like get into that intimate space together without sex, which I thought was really cool and really beautiful and really healing and really special. And it's ultimately it brought us a lot closer together. And in me working to actually see her, she could actually see me. And there was this like really genuine, beautiful love there. There is this beautiful love in that I'm just kind of myself, my imperfect self. I'm not trying to be something I'm not. I'm kind of working towards a lot of things. And, you know, she sees that. And I think that's kind of like the beauty of love is to be seen fully. But you can only really be seen fully if you see others fully first. And have the courage to do that. Have the courage to make the difficult decision to be like, hey, I know my limitations. I know I'm hypersexual. Like, I'm going to use that energy to actually like invest in seeing you clearly. And for the first time, I wasn't trying to get something from her. I was just trying to get to know her, and it's been like a really magical relationship. I don't know how long I'll be down here in Brazil for. Um, so there's no kind of like, hey, I don't think we should take this further, but like this friendship is magical. It's beautiful. And it just makes me really excited about like, what do I want in a marriage? This idea of really building the foundation of intimacy first to really get to know each other. And then when the sex comes, it's not something that you're just like taking, which has been my pattern my entire life. It's this mystical kind of new spiritual plane that you can get to go together. And my heart just like sings just like thinking about it. It's just like, wow. It's like after 34 years of just me taking. It's like I want to give. And there's something really profound in that. And so I think when folks kind of look at chastity on the internet, they type it in on Google, they kind of like see like, these chastity belts and this repression. And I think it couldn't be opposite from that. It's this invitation to kind of put a little bit of a silencer on the carnal impulses and to try to go a level beyond that. So that you can be more honest, whether you're in a current relationship or you're married or you're single, it's this invitation to really kind of start seeing with your heart, and less so with maybe a corrupted mind, a mind that's filled with garbage. And I'm still very new to this. I'm not past my sexual kind of like impulses and natures. I'm very hypersexual. I'm very horny. I'm a very corrupt man who's learning chastity. And I think, and I know that if I can do it, someone who is probably the weakest person I know when it comes to like sexual, desires, like you can do it too. And I'm really not trying to take this from any other angle than just building a community of men who are done with this cycle of shame to build something real, to integrate their sexuality, because it has been so therapeutic and healing. It has been challenging, do not get me wrong, but the rewards have been beyond comprehension in terms of peace, satisfaction, joy, abundance, love. So come with me. I invite you to join as we figure this out together. Peace, love, in Jesus Christ. Aloha. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.